Look at these 3 words written larger than the rest, with a special pride never written before or since. Tall words proudly saying, "We the people."
Hi folks, and welcome back to the Lex Rex Institute's YouTube channel. Once again, I'm Alexander Haberbush, President and Lead Counsel here. And at the Lex Rex Institute, we fight to hold government accountable and remind officials that the Constitution isn't just a suggestion, it's mandatory. And today's video is going to be our third in our series, How to Make Your Vote Count, where we talk about the often overlooked local offices and what qualifications to look for and how to make an informed vote for those offices. Today, we'll be looking at legal offices. What are those? Well, it's kind of just our way of grouping together all the different offices that interact with the law. Now, don't all government officials interact with the law? Yes, that's true, but here we're looking at the offices that either prosecute crimes or are some way involved in court, actually litigating on behalf of government, or in the case of criminal prosecution, on behalf of the people, but really it's also on behalf of government, although, it should be on behalf of we the people. So what are those offices? Well, they're going to be things like your district attorney, or your city attorney, or county attorneys. A lot of things with attorney in the name. Also sheriffs, we're including them in here as well. And a lot of these roles, actually all these roles, I would say, have a profound impact on your community in ways that you might not fully realize. So, why do they matter? Well, like a lot of the offices that we've looked at, these legal positions often fall under the radar. Many voters just end up making last-minute choices without solid information. Because, after all, who wouldn't want to elect a complete stranger to make decisions about who goes to jail and which felonies don't get prosecuted? So if you do want to have an informed decision about those things, because I really don't think those decisions are best made by people we know nothing about, what should we look at? Well, the first thing to remember about these offices is that, like judges, these offices are non-political. You're not like voting for a legislator here. Nobody's going to pass any flashy new laws from behind a city attorney's desk. They aren't about ideology as much as they're about knowledge, experience, and the ability to apply the law fairly and effectively. Whether it's enforcing laws, representing the public, or prosecuting criminals, these positions require understanding of the legal system and the unique challenges of the communities in which these candidates are running. And, as we always emphasize, competence matters. You can't simply look for somebody who shares your values. You need someone who can actually do the job. And policy goals aren't just a non-issue here, they're actually an active negative. Simply put, if a candidate for city attorney has an obvious ideology with policy goals they want to accomplish, that person's a bad pick for city attorney. Policy goals aren't the answer here. Sound legal judgment and decision-making are what you're looking for. So, what kinds of experience should you look for to find these things? Well, if you don't want somebody who spouts ideology, what sorts of statements or platforms are actually good for these candidates to make? Well, let's break it down by office. Well, first, let's take a look at sheriffs. Now, the concept of police power is going to be central to the idea of a sheriff's role. Now, what is police power? Well, that refers to the authority vested in government to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. And this power isn't unlimited. It needs to align with constitutional principles. Now, why is that? Well, that's because the police power isn't something that originates from government institutions. It originates from the people themselves. In a well-ordered society, the people delegate a portion of their own sovereign authority to government officials to protect their life, liberty, and property. This is recognized by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, and it's central to our idea of what a government is. Now, historically, the sheriff reflects this idea of delegated authority, probably in the most direct way that any public official does. The English crown, which ruled by consent of the governed, entrusted the sheriff to enforce the law within local shires. That trust flowed from the people to the crown, and in turn, the crown appointed the sheriff as the people's protector. At least that's the theory. In the American tradition, where sovereignty rests directly with the people rather than with the crown, the sheriff is elected by the people to perform essentially the same role, keeping the peace and upholding the law in communities. Now, because the sheriff's role is grounded in the police power that flows from the people, the election of a sheriff is an essential feature of maintaining accountable law enforcement. That's one reason why LRI believes the sheriff's office should remain as democratic as possible. The police power belongs to us, and we're just hiring a guy to exercise it on our behalf. If you've seen High Noon, or really basically any Western movie, you already know exactly how this works. You go out and you hire a sheriff because you want them to enforce the law. You're not good at doing it yourself, and the guy with the gun's better at it, although I think a lot of us have guns too. But we delegate that to somebody else, and then he accomplishes that for us. Now, while Lex Rex is often critical of the progressive push to make as many government offices elected as possible, and a lot of them just frankly shouldn't be, like judges or auditors, the sheriff's office is an exception. Law enforcement officials wield tremendous power, and it's absolutely essential that the sheriff, as the highest ranking law enforcement officer, be directly accountable to the public. So we think it's with good reason that we elect sheriffs. Now, in California, where Lex Rex is headquartered, the sheriff is actually the only law enforcement officer that's specifically recognized in our state's constitution. The same is true of many other states. And in practice, the sheriff's duty include operating county jails, conducting search and rescue missions, and of course, providing law enforcement services to unincorporated areas, ones that don't have police departments. Now, the sheriff isn't just another police officer. It's actually a fundamentally different role. They're the embodiment of local law enforcement, and they're vested with the community's trust to act on behalf of that community's welfare. So, what should you look for when voting for a sheriff? First of all, you want them to have practical law enforcement experience. A candidate should have significant hands-on experience in law enforcement. This isn't a job for a politician or career government employee who spent their entire life shuffling paperwork. We don't need someone who was really good at approving parking tickets either. While time in law enforcement is absolutely valuable, as we mentioned, most law enforcement is not recognized under the state constitution. And as always, government employees, especially lifelong ones, are always going to have an inherent conflict of interest when holding any of these offices. It's because their long-term alignment with government bureaucracy often, and I would say almost universally, makes them less responsive to the people they serve and more responsive to special interests or institutional interests. Now, that's not to say you should never vote for a sheriff who's worked for the government, but it's a definite conflict and you should be aware of it when voting. The best candidates bring experience from outside government, whether it's in security management, private investigations, or consulting roles, where they've learned practical skills, leadership, accountability, and resource management. Second thing you're going to look for is commitment to constitutional policing. So the police power needs to be exercised within the bounds of the law, as we mentioned earlier. Specifically, the Constitution includes a lot of protections against encroachments of the police power as exercised by the government. So look for somebody who's committed to defending individual liberties while also maintaining public order. Now, that's not to say you want a law and order candidate. In fact, you don't. And you also don't want an advocate for criminal justice reform. So if somebody tells you they're going to get tough or go easy on crime, both of those candidates are missing the point. That's because both of these interfere with the exercise of the sheriff's duty, which are to the people directly and first and foremost have to do with the protection of the people's rights. These necessarily include rights of the accused, such as constitutional guarantees against random search and seizure. Next thing you're going to look for is going to be transparency and accountability. A sheriff needs to be responsive to the people they serve. Candidates should have a track record of transparency and be willing to explain and justify their actions. Check if the candidate has attended any public forums. If they don't serve in their community, that's a huge red flag. And you don't want somebody who just started being active in their community right when they started campaigning. You want someone who's been a fixture in your community for a long time. Someone who doesn't know the community inside out is a very poor choice for sheriff. Now, this is not an ivory tower position. It's extremely hands-on, and you want someone who knows the community in which they'll serve inside and out. If the only place you've ever seen them before is on lawn signs, that's a red flag. Don't vote for it. The next office we'll look at is someone who frequently works with the sheriff, and that's the district attorney, or DA, as I'll probably call them for the rest of this video. Now, they also play a role in criminal justice, only unlike the sheriff, who enforces the law on the ground, the DA works within the legal system to ensure that those who break the law are held accountable. The DA is responsible for prosecuting criminal cases on behalf of the public. That's why it usually says the people versus whoever, making decisions about whether to file charges, and determining what penalties to seek in criminal cases. The office of DA has deep roots in American law, and it traces back to the English common law, like the sheriff did, where the king's attorney prosecuted crimes on behalf of the crown. When the American colonies became independent, the role evolved to reflect the principles of popular sovereignty. Instead of representing the monarch, the DA became the people's representative in criminal matters. So rather than, King Charles versus whoever, it's the people versus whoever. The goal was to ensure that justice would be pursued impartially, without favoritism, and with accountability to the public. Now that's the origin, but the DA's role over time has grown in importance, especially as the US has developed a more complex legal system. Today, DAs wield significant discretion, from deciding whether to bring charges, to negotiating plea deals, to determining which cases to prioritize. In modern America, the DA is often the chief law enforcement official within any jurisdiction, and they're responsible for prosecuting criminal cases on behalf of the state or county and ensuring that justice runs smoothly. Now, given this expansion of the scope of the DA's power, it's extremely important to find someone who is concerned not just with prosecuting criminals, but with the constitutional limits of his office. So look for someone who values process, guarantees free trials and fair trials, and avoids prosecutorial misconduct, such as excessive punishment or wrongful prosecution. A candidate with integrity will recognize that justice requires both accountability and fairness. A law and order platform is a huge red flag here, much more so even than it was for sheriff. But someone who won't prosecute crimes is even worse. If my editor didn't roll a picture of Gascon there, she should have. You want someone with a deep respect for the rule of law in every angle, both ensuring that the law is obeyed and that citizens' rights are protected by the guarantees of due process. If they're promising sweeping changes, what they really need is a legislative internship, not a position as district attorney. So, what relevant prosecutorial experience should you look for? A DA should have hands-on courtroom experience. Now, most lawyers, may surprise you to hear, don't go to court. DAs do. You need somebody who's done it before. You want somebody who has successfully handled complex cases, such as felonies or violent offenses, and understands the nuances of criminal law. Now, beware candidates with mostly administrative or political experience, although these people do often run for DA. While the DA's office does involve some managerial responsibilities, the role primarily requires skill in prosecuting cases. So a strong candidate is one who's spent substantial time in the courtroom, not just behind a desk. And again, holding a position in government is a red flag. It shows that this person has a conflict of interest. Rights of the accused and victims both have essentially an adversarial relationship with government. And you want somebody who's going to take the people's side, not the government's. Criminal justice reform should be left to legislators, not folks who decide who goes to jail. And while we can't endorse candidates, I can say that if somebody has a commercial like this guy.
Welcome to Los Angeles, where it's a catalytic converter theft bonanza 24/7.
It's like these are free in Los Angeles.
Not so fast, Sparky. Bobcat! Playtime's over.
You should probably vote for them. All right, leaving the criminal realm and now looking at the civil realm, we'll take a look at city attorneys. So what's a city attorney? Well, they serve as legal counsel for city government. These are often the folks who oppose us on our lawsuits, so we know a lot about them, at least a lot about the bad ones. Now, while the sheriff and DA's duties center around enforcing the law and maintaining public safety, the city attorney ensures that the city itself follows the law in the civil arena. The office is responsible for advising city officials, representing the city in legal matters, and prosecuting violations of city ordinances. Not criminal violations, but civil violations. A good city attorney helps prevent legal missteps before they happen, saving taxpayers money and keeping city government accountable. If you've ever wondered who gets to tell the mayor, you can't do that, it's probably the city attorney. On the other side, the city attorney also gets to tell the city what they can do. If you've heard about cities pushing back against unconstitutional mandates or directives from the state or federal government, a confident city attorney was most likely involved in that. Now, while the sheriff enforces the law in public, the city attorney enforces it behind the scenes by ensuring that the city follows legal procedures in contracts, zoning, litigation, and public policy. It is a technical role that requires specialized legal expertise, not just political grandstanding. It's less hands-on than a sheriff, and while it does require knowledge of how the city operates, it doesn't require the same degree of active involvement in the community that a sheriff does. So you don't necessarily need somebody who's at all the city meeting in public events and so on and so forth, the way you would for a sheriff. So what do you look for when hiring a city attorney? Well, they should have municipal law experience. City attorneys should know the ins and outs of municipal law, things like contracts, land use, employment issues, and public policy. We don't need somebody who just discovered the city charter last Tuesday. Look for someone with proven experience handling legal complexities that cities face. The ideal candidate would have worked on cases or issues specific to local government, ideally in private practice. Be cautious of candidates with purely political resumes or extensive government backgrounds. A city attorney needs real legal experience, not just familiarity with public administration. Someone who spent their entire career in bureaucracy probably lacks the practical skills necessary to navigate the challenges of representing a city effectively. Not to mention, they'll have the same conflicts of interest we mentioned earlier. You'll notice a trend here. They should also have a non-political approach, like we discussed. Their job is to apply the law impartially. It's not to push a political agenda. It's important that candidates for this office stress professionalism, neutrality, and commitment to good governance. Avoid candidates who frame their campaign around advancing policy goals, because that's the job of elected policymakers, not of a city attorney. We're looking for somebody who knows the city charter, not somebody who wants to rewrite it. You also want somebody that has a backbone, because they've got to challenge corruption in their city. A city attorney acts on behalf of the city. It doesn't act on behalf of the city's officers. That means they work for the people, not the government of the city. So a good city attorney will understand this. Now, many, if not most, cities have issues with corruption. I won't get into how deep this goes or how pervasive it is, but believe me when I say that it's almost certainly a problem where you live, even if the people in office are honest. It's just the nature of the system that corruption tends to breed like wildfire in city government. And the city attorney, along with city auditor, is probably the most important office for curbing this corruption. But doing that requires understanding what the city council and mayor are allowed to do, and more importantly, that they're not his boss. This will often make enemies of the powers that be in government. So somebody without a lot of endorsements isn't a bad thing here. And for all these offices, remember that our caution against candidates endorsed by groups like Firefighters Association or Police Officers Association, this does still apply here, since these are public sector unions and their endorsements, you don't really show that they're pro-firefighter as much as they're pro-public sector union policies. Now remember, the city attorney is the person who tells the mayor no. So if they're best friends with the mayor, that's going to pose a bit of a problem. You also want someone who's responsive to the community. Look for candidates with long-standing ties to the area, people who've engaged in community issues over time. You don't want somebody who just started engaging during campaign season. A candidate who understands the city's unique challenges is always going to be better equipped to provide legal experience that fits the local context. So look for that person. Next, we'll look at county attorney. Now, this is another group that's usually on the other side of LRI's lawsuits, and the duties are fairly similar to those of city attorney, only for the county level. The same guidelines apply here that apply to city attorney. Now, what does this office do? Well, they handle more complex issues, including larger scale litigation and advising multiple departments across the county. So when evaluating candidates, look for somebody that's got a track record in both civil and criminal law, given the variety of cases that a county attorney may face. And remember, this office requires a generalist. You're not going to get somebody with, for instance, a great deal of expertise in election law, despite the fact that election law is of overriding importance to county government. That's why it's important that you get somebody without an ego for this position, someone who's willing to defer to outside counsel when needed. Experience, not politics, should be your guiding principle here. Now I want to address the problem of name recognition. When it comes to voting for legal offices, name recognition usually and often does influence voters. It's common for politicians with law degrees, but little or no practical experience to run for these offices. While they may have recognizable names, they lack the competence required to perform the job effectively. Meanwhile, their opponent might be a seasoned attorney with extensive experience but little public recognition. Competence must always take precedence over popularity here. Always prioritize candidates with proven experience in the type of work required for that office. Remember, the smoothest talker isn't always the best choice. Sometimes they just practice in front of the mirror. Thanks for watching this episode of How to Make Your Vote Count. Now, voting for legal offices like sheriff, district attorney, and city and county attorney isn't just about ideology, it's about competence. These positions require deep legal knowledge, practical experience, and commitment to justice. So, when you vote, familiar name or the right party affiliation isn't what you should be looking for. Look for somebody who has the skills and the experience necessary to do the job well. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember, when in doubt, vote against the incumbent. Unless you're absolutely sure they did a really good job, but let's be honest, how often does that really happen? Stay tuned for more videos in our How to Make Your Vote Count series. And remember, the deep state must be destroyed.